Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to the national webinar on Unveiling Verse, the heart and art of reading poetry. And before we begin the session, I would like to tell you that we received 754 registrations for this webinar, which is a happy fact for us because we are the members of staff of a college in a remote district of Odisha. But it is a matter of pride for our college that we are hosting this national webinar, which has in fact turned international in terms of participation, because in the registrations that we have interested participants from Uzbekistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So I invite all the participants to this webinar, and I hope that it is a useful one for them. I am happy to welcome the resource person for today's webinar, Dr. Manu Mangattu. And it is my privilege to introduce Sir to the audience. Dr. Manu Mangattu is primarily a poet, which is why he is the resource person for this webinar. He was our first choice, and very graciously he accepted our invitation and joined us in spite of his busy schedule. And now it is my task to tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Manu Mangattu is a professor in English from Kerala, India. He has imbibed his penchant for poetry and flair for writing from his parents. He completed his post-graduation in English language and literature from Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, securing second rank and a career as a literature. He prefers the freedom of online tutoring to the confines of an institution. Besides doing translations into English from Chinese and Sanskrit, he writes poetry both in English and Malayalam. His active involvement in Chinese poetry translations won him the honorary title Comrade to Poetry China in 2016. He is described as a brooding romanticist in poetry, a doubtful debutante in fiction, and a morbid classicist in criticism. Dr. Manu Mangattu is the chief editor of Aesthetic Journal for International Literary Enterprises and is on the editorial board of Spring Magazine. He has published 9 books, 79 international research publications, 97 academic papers, and 20 edited volumes with reputed publishers like Routledge, HarperCollins, Harvard University Press, and Penguin. Some of his published books are Mute Melodies, English Poetry Collection, Pain, Pleasure, and Paradox in Poetry, a Verse Compendium, Innocence as Ignorance, Aesthetic Prognostications, The Many Avatars of Sylvia Plath, Sparks of Melancholy, Poetry Collection in Malayalam. During his stint as an assistant professor of English, he had done UGC-funded research projects and a Swayam MOOC course on romantic literature. After an apprenticeship in Shakespeare under Dr. Stephen Greenblatt at Harvard University, he currently offers part-time guidance to 27 research scholars from India, Iran, Australia, Indonesia, and other countries. He mentors numerous postgraduates, guest lecturers, research scholars in India preparing for NTA NET examination in English. Dr. Mangattu is a polyglot with a passion for music and film. We are so glad to have you with us today, sir. Welcome to Model Degree College, Deogarh. Now it is turn of our principal, sir, Dr. Bijay Kumar Maharana, who is an assistant professor in Odia. But more than that, I must tell the audience that Dr. Maharana is a bilingual poet. He writes both in Odia and in Hindi, and he is in love with the world of poetry. So he's the right person to begin this session. And now I invite our principal to speak a few words and inaugurate this webinar. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to Model Degree College, Deogarh. I am happy that the Department of English of our college is hosting this national webinar on Unveiling verse, the heart or art of reading poetry. Many students find poetry difficult to understand, and sometimes it is a tall task for teachers to convince them that poetry uses language intelligently to talk about the essence of things. Poetry creates image and challenges the reader. I hope that today's session by Dr. Manu Mangattu will empower participants to read and teach poetry in a creative way so that poetry is loved and not feared. I welcome the resource person and wish that the participant find the webinar useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your encouragement. Now I invite Dr. Brajakishore Sahu, who is Assistant Professor and Head, Department of Political Science, and he bears the additional responsibility of the coordinator of IQAC of our college. And he's a very dynamic person who actively participates in all the events organized by our college. And now it is his turn to say something and encourage our efforts. Please, sir.
Distinguished guests, respected principal sir, and the faculty members and esteemed poets present here, and dear students. So it is my pleasure to welcome each of you to this seminar, which is titled on Unveiling the Verse, the Art of Reading Poetry, which is organized by the Department of English under the able leadership of Satrupa Misra, with cooperation of Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Model Degree College, Deogarh. As the IQAC coordinator, it is indeed a privilege to be part of an event which is dedicated to the beauty, depth, and transformative power of poetry. In our fast-paced, technology-driven world, poetry provides a much-needed space for reflection, imagination, and self-expression. I think today's seminar focuses on the art of reading poetry, which is an essential skill that goes beyond mere literacy. So this seminar is about finding meaning within poetry's verses, rhythms, and exploring the ways in which poetry enriches our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to the honored speaker of this session, Dr. Manu Mangattu, who is here to share his expertise on reading and interpreting poetry. We are very fortunate to have him with us. So the various facets of poetic expression, this seminar will unlock the poetry's potential for personal as well as intellectual growth. To all participants, especially to our students, I encourage you all to immerse yourself fully in today's discussion. As we embark on this journey of discovery, let us keep in mind that poetry, like all great art, speak something which is timeless within us. Let us, this seminar, inspire you deeply, think more creatively, and appreciate the beauty that language can bring to our lives. Thank you once again for joining us for this inspiring session. I look forward to a day filled with insightful learning and, most importantly, a shared love for poetry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, with your thoughtful words and inspiration. I'm sure with your support, we will be able to organize many such events in future. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, it is my privilege to invite our resource person, Dr. Manu Mangat, to go ahead with his session. Please, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. So, dear respected principal of the college, dear IQAC coordinator, sir, organizer and HOD Shatrupa, ma'am, other faculty members from this wonderful college at Deogarh in Odisha, dear participants, teachers, students, research scholars, friends, whoever is here, good evening. Parikita Panigrahi is unmute. It would be nice if you can mute yourself. I'm calling out just because you might not have realized that you are unmute. Otherwise, everyone else is on mute. Thank you so much. Now, people were telling that I am going to, share my erudition and wisdom and knowledge with this erudite audience on an erudite topic. Nothing can be far from the truth. I'm not saying you are not erudite, but I don't consider myself erudite enough to, speak on this topic. Yeah, I have given this title to my lecture, but then the more I look at this title, the more I realize that I cannot do justice to this topic at all. And when I see 150 odd people, 175 people attending this event, I hope I will be able to do some justice to all of you who are here. And a kind request to those of you who are here to please, nice to meet you, Kanisma, happy welcome. Requesting those of you who can to please turn your videos on and your audios muted. Thank you. So, this lecture is titled Unveiling Verse, the Heart or the Art of Reading Poetry. This lecture is, I want this lecture to be an exhortation, an open and public invitation to steal some of the most beautiful and invaluable things around us. Yes, you heard it right. I ask you to steal. Let me teach you to steal. Steal feelings and emotions. Steal experiences. Steal insights and visions. Steal life and love. Steal sweetness and light. Steal impression and suppression and expression. Steal loveliness and loneliness. Steal melodies and rhapsodies. Steal poets and prophets by stealing poetry. Plant these poems in your heart. Let it take roots within. Let it grow. Let it grow branches and leaves. fruits and flowers within you. And then, maybe then, you will become a poet. Or better still, you will become a poem. Readers, the strange wayfarers in your journey, might pluck out your fruits and bite your tongue, might close their eyes for a moment and kiss your flowers, might take a stone and throw at you, might climb on you and play hide and seek in their quest to find your yearnings and meanings, your melodies and mysteries. When they feel helpless and hopeless and helpless, they will seek you, dear poem. For your fruits will then be priceless and peerless. Why? For your coffers are full of stolen treasures. For your flowers boast of forlorn pleasures. For you to recall Coleridge. For you on honey dew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. Let me tell you how to steal. I know how to steal because I have stolen. I have stolen from Shakespeare and Marlowe. You can call it an open confession also. I have stolen from Keats and Shelley and Coleridge. I have stolen from Browning and Tennyson and Matthew Arnold. I have stolen from Emily Dickinson and Ezra Pound, from Tagore and Kamala Das, from Sylvia Plath and Eliot and William Butler Yeats, from Rupi Kaur and Maya Angelou. Hence, I know why and how the caged bird sings. Hence, I know I can help you steal. Steal poetry, friends. Steal poems. Steal verses. No logician or didactic or philosopher would ever accuse you for it. No judge would ever sentence you. Yes, you will be arrested. You will be held captive. But you will enjoy and cherish your days of captivity. Why? For you will be held captive by a beauty, an irresistible, seductive beauty, the beauty of verse, the beauty of poetry. Don't you wish to be arrested, friends? Don't you wish to be sentenced for a lifelong imprisonment in poetry? I assure you it will be a joy forever. There will be hanging too. You will say, the albatross about my neck was hung. And if it is the days of intertextuality, you will plead with the albatross to make you immortal with a kiss. And some verses would indeed immortalize you after you are gone, forever. Forever gone, forever immortalized. Some would say, here lies one whose name was written in water. Some friend would plead, do not go gentle into that good night. And many would fondly remember, here rests his head upon the lap of earth, a youth to fortune and to fame unknown. Fair signs frowned not on his humble birth, and melancholy marked him for her own. Large was his bounty, and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely send. He gave to misery all he had, a tear. He gained from heaven was all he wished, a friend, a friend. Let me unveil poetry for you. Because this lecture is about unveiling verse, the art or the heart of reading poetry. Yeah, I was talking to you about stealing poetry, not reading poetry. And you have understood and internalized what I meant. Hold poetry in your heart so that you can seed and feed poetry, so that you can read and breed poetry. Poetry will lead you and feed you when you are in need. Just pay heed. My dear friends, don't just be happy reading and learning and teaching poetry. I exhort you to feed on poetry. By heart poetry. This is an often forgotten thing today. When we were kids, we by hearted the nursery rhymes. We all had to by heart poems in our mother tongue, didn't we? Then why did we stop doing that? Where did we lose that skill to by heart poetry? Yeah, we have excuses. I'm not good at by hearting. I don't seem to remember the exact lines, but you see, I can write an essay on it. Yes, yes, but have we tried, friends? Have we really tried to take poetry to our hearts? By hearting isn't a monotonous activity of remembering and repeating something without actually seeing. No, that isn't the stealing and by hearting we are interested in. For us, for the lovers of poetry, and for the future lovers of poetry, by hearting is about doing something by your heart. Do poetry with your heart. Then poetry will happen. And then trust me, you will by heart poetry. And that poetry will yield the fruits and flowers we were talking about. This lecture is titled Unveiling Verse, the art or heart of reading poetry. I tell this title again and again so that I don't forget. Unveiling poetry. What is this unveiling? Our poetry, I would say, is a radiant bride, draped in a delicate veil that conceals her beauty, mystery, and hidden depths. The reader, like a groom, approaches with an eagerness to uncover her secrets, to know her fully, but he must do so with tenderness, patience, and reverence. Each line of verse is like a fold of the bride's veil, thin, elusive, yet embroidered with the most delicate and romantic patterns. The groom's fingertips might tremble as he lifts each layer, slowly revealing the luminous countenance beneath, the beauty that resides in each word, each rhythm, and every carefully chosen syllable. The groom's journey, when we talk about unveiling verse, it's the groom's journey. The groom's journey is sensuous and suspenseful. If he rushes, he risks missing the nuances that make her, and therefore the poetry, unique. He must gaze deeply into her eyes, taking in the quiet blush of her cheeks and the shy curve of her smile, akin to the reader savoring a line, noting a subtle metaphor, feeling the swell of a crescendo in a poetic stanza. Unveiling poetry demands an intimacy and devotion where the groom, the reader, discovers himself mirrored in her depths, just as readers find reflections of their own feelings, their own dreams, and their own longings within verse. When a reader, like a patient groom, carefully unveils poetry, she reveals herself, gifting him her inner world, her most profound truths. And in this moment of revelation, epiphany, he becomes one with her essence and the poetic treasures, her beauty, wisdom, and enchantments are forever his. It was Stanley Fish, the reader response critic, who said, "A poem has as many texts as there are readers and readings." Recall his "Is there a text in the class" experiment. Every time the reader meets the poem, every time the handsome prince meets his enigmatic princess, a new unveiling happens. A new facet of the poem, a hitherto unexplored aspect of his beloved, gets unraveled. There was another experiment too, by a man called I.A. Richards. He called it practical criticism. We do it even today in our exams. Critical appreciations of poems without title or authors. We call it close reading. To unveil, our handsome prince has to come close to his beloved. Close reading. To know her fully, our handsome, happy prince has to forget everything and everyone else. Close reading. All historical and biographical aspects are extrinsic to the beauty of a poem, said the new critics. What is close reading? For our younger friends, for whom this lecture was originally intended, the UG students and the PG students, close reading is close reading. I say this often. Close reading, this is a book. And if you are doing close reading, you bring your book close to you, close to your face, close to your eyes. That is close reading. You are looking at the simile and metaphor and all the stylistic devices in your text. That is close reading. Also, close reading happens when you know that your text is closed. There is nothing extrinsic. Whatever is there, biographical, historical information, that is unnecessary. This is the method of close reading recommended by the new critics. And if you extend this metaphor, allusion, or whatever you want to call it, our happy prince doesn't worry about his beloved's parents or what they had in mind when they conceived her. If he worries about those things, he commits what they call the intentional fallacy. Two friends, two new critics, Wimsett and Beardsley, they called it the intentional fallacy. Also, he shouldn't judge her based on the impression she has created in his mind. For there is much left to be unveiled and enjoyed. Okay, is there some noise? No. So why should he not do that? Lest he commits affective fallacy. Again, our brothers Wimsett and Beardsley. This metaphor will go on and on and on, but I need to give a lecture lest the organizers attribute new fallacies to me and ask me to quit. The lecture, Shatrupa ma'am is smiling. I hope it's a friendly smile. Let me tell you whence this idea of unveiling verse occurred to me. Maybe some of you remember. Percy Bysshe Shelley in A Defense of Poetry that came out in 1821. That same year when our John Keats passed away. Shelley wrote, poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world and makes familiar objects be as if they were not familiar. This is where I got this idea of unveiling verse. Poetry invites readers to see the ordinary with fresh eyes. Now you will say, or you will remember what Victor Shklovsky called defamiliarization in 1917. In fact, through this lecture itself, what I might try to do is an act of defamiliarization. This lecture isn't about saying something new. No, absolutely not. I'm nobody and I know nothing to say something new about poetry. Not at all. I will be happy if I can prick your conscience on what you have but haven't embraced. Everything that needs to be told about poetry has already been said by great people in great words. And still, has anything changed? This will be a question that looms large in our minds. Has anything changed? Poets have waxed eloquent on the need to love, to care, to be empathetic and be imaginative. But we don't love, we don't care, we don't read, we don't try to understand. We still fight wars, more wars, in fact. No, we have lost count of whichever places wars are going on. The Middle East, Russia, Ukraine. Where is there that there is no war? We fight lots of wars. Wilfred Owen in Dulce et Decorum Est called for empathy and awareness and reminded us that the noble idea of fighting in war and dying for one's country is the old lie. Was he not a patriotic person? But he said dying for your country is simply the old lie. Still, we celebrate that lie. We need martyrs, don't we? To add more red to our red rose, right? Siegfried Sassoon in Suicide in the Trenches critiqued the glorification of war, describing the despair and tragedy faced by young soldiers. He used poetry to strip the glorification and romanticization of war, making war's brutal, tragic reality inescapable. Did that stop wars? No. Did poetry do anything? Probably that's why the poet, W.H. Auden, in his elegy, for that matter, in memory of W.B. Yeats, 1939, famously wrote that poetry makes nothing happen. Written in 1939. First think about that. And what is 1939 best remembered for? As the year that marked the beginning of the Second World War. Poetry makes nothing happen. Why, friends? Why did Auden say so? Was he mourning what was going to happen, the Second World War? Was it foresight and farsight? Auden, our teachers would tell us, Auden seemed to imply that poetry lacks direct, tangible impact in the way political action or practical interventions might. Yet, within that same poem, In Memory of W.B. Yeats, Auden goes on to describe poetry as a means of preserving and illuminating human experience, highlighting its indirect power to move hearts, shape thoughts, and sustain memories across generations. So why poetry makes nothing happen? My dear friends, if we aren't ready for poetry, if we don't allow poetry, then poetry makes nothing happen. Really. Poetry won't change you against your free will. Poetry is not magic or sorcery. It isn't witchcraft or divine intervention to change you against your will. But if you welcome poetry into your bosoms, if you embrace it and love it and cherish it, it will make nothing happen. Yes, it will make even nothing happen. You will start seeing nothing happening in front of you. Not just everything, poetry can even make nothing happen. And when we say poetry, we are not just talking about the exclusive genre called poetry. No, we mean the whole of literature, the power that swells within us when we read Jane Austen or William Shakespeare or Sylvia Plath or Kamala Das, the energy that provides, salvation through catharsis when we are in the world of art. Poetry makes nothing happen. Rest is silence. Hamlet, rest is silence, right? Last words of Hamlet. Hamlet died hoping that Horatio will live to tell his story. In fact, Horatio tells Hamlet, I want to die. I don't want to live in this harsh world where there is no you. And Hamlet requested him, no, Horatio, you must please live and breathe in this harsh world to tell my story. Hamlet requested his confidant Horatio. And many Horatios lived along to keep telling the tragic tale of the sad prince of Denmark, who could never decide to be or not to be. That's another duty we have, my dear friends. We must live to tell the story. If a poem moved us to tears, if a story helped us forget our fears, if a play helped us break into peals of laughter, we must tell those stories to our friends, our students, our teachers, our peers, so that they too will read, so that they too will experience what we did. Help others steal, help others heal, freely help others steal those tiny fragments of heaven which you and I are lucky to get, called poetry. Maybe think about Hamlet for just another moment. What is Hamlet? The Mona Lisa of literature, but termed an artistic failure by that high priest who occupied the sacred wood of poetry in the 20th century. Who's that? T.S. Eliot. Hamlet and His Problems, 1919. T.S. Eliot argued or stated that the only way to evoke emotion, a particular emotion in a reader, is through an objective correlative. And we have by hearted that definition. A set of objects, a situation, or a chain of events which shall be the formula for the evocation of that particular emotion. That is objective correlative. Now, The teacher in me always enjoyed T.S. Eliot. The host has kindly
Sorry, sir.
muted me.
Sorry. While muting others, I muted you. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay. So yeah, you know, it, T.S. Eliot is a teacher's delight, especially the essayist T.S. Eliot, whether it is Hamlet and his problems or tradition and the individual. And such amazing writing, and you love teaching T.S. Eliot, even his objective correlative, irrespective of whether you agree that Hamlet is an Hamlet artistic failure or not. It's amazing learning that essay, tradition and the individual talent, or Hamlet and his problems, where he speaks about this objective correlative, or tradition where he speaks about poetry not being a turning loose of emotions. No, uh, but the poet in me always was worried or always wondered, isn't the success of Hamlet, of course, not any theatrical success, but success in our hearts, isn't the success of Hamlet a proof that applying empirical concepts to works of art won't necessarily work? We don't need to bring in science versus arts conflict here. No, that's not my purpose. That's for another day. For now, let us stick to our poetry and the art of reading poetry. So, how else should we approach the poem? We approached it through the fingers of that happy prince. We approached it through close reading. We approached it through practical criticism. Maybe we can read poetry aloud. Poetry is, trust me, I'm saying all this from my conviction only. I'm not saying anything from anywhere, just from my conviction. So poetry is designed for the ear as well as the eye, with rhythm, meter, and sound shaping our understanding of poetry. You know, remember Robert Frost when he said, the ear is the best reader. The ear is the best reader. Read poetry aloud. We can annotate poetry diligently. Close readings and annotations, and I really mean annotation. Look at some of the texts of your teachers. You will find that there is no iota of space in their poetry textbooks. It is fully annotated. And we students think, oh my God, my sir is such a fool. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know the meanings of words. He doesn't know the implication of things. That is why he has covered and, tarnished all his beautiful textbook with all those inscriptions. Trust me, friends, those inscriptions are inscribed in heaven, are inscriptions from heaven. Those annotations help us appreciate shifts in tone or unusual imagery or recurring symbols. And by annotation, I also mean looking at secondary materials. Studying poetry is not bad. Only when you study poetry, you will understand it better so that you can appreciate it better later. William Emerson in Seven Types of Ambiguity, argued that ambiguity enriches poetry, allowing readers multiple interpretations and deeper engagement. Now, let us not move into plurisignation and intertextuality and deconstructive methods. Oh, we have kids here. Shatrupa ma'am's students are here. This lecture was initially and originally envisaged for these young friends from UG and PG. Literary theory at times has to be Bowdlerized before it can be served to our kids so that they can relish these. Or should we talk theory in terms of poetry? Or should we talk poetry in terms of theory? Maybe a little bit, if time permits. Poetry at its core seeks to capture the inexpressible. The inexpressible, something that cannot be articulated. When you go through trauma theory, for example, you will come across this. Trauma is an experience that can never be articulated, cannot be represented either. The unrepresentability of trauma is something that people like Kathy Caruth and others have talked extensively on. So poetry also is about the inexpressible, but it seeks to capture the inexpressible, the numinous aspects of the human experience. As Eliot said, poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion, not an expression of personality, but an escape from personality. While theory can provide us with essential lenses to decode texts, poetry's artistic resonance demands an interpretive sensibility that moves beyond formal analysis. Theories like deconstruction challenge fixed meanings, inviting readers to see a text as a play of signifiers where meaning is deferred. Yet poetry such as William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, for example, exemplify how a text can present multifaceted interpretations that resist stable definitions while also inviting emotional connections. Poetry reveals. Poetry reveals the tensions and contradictions within language. And that doesn't require deconstruction. That just requires common sense and human sense and a little bit of humor sense to realize that poetry uses language which itself is enough for all and everything you need to ever do. Poetry reveals tensions and contradictions within language, aligning, of course, with Derrida's ideas that language carries both meaning and its disruption within itself. Language carries within itself meaning and its disruption. And for readers familiar with Sigmund Freud or Jung or Lacanian psychoanalysis, poetry can provide fertile ground to explore the unconscious. Think of Emily Dickinson's Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but ourselves and immortality, which layers, peels off the layers of the subconscious fear and acceptance of mortality through the figure of death as a kindly suitor. Poetry, like dreams in psychoanalysis, offers us access to hidden fears, hidden desires, and forgotten conflicts. Living in an age of misinformation, we are adept at questioning accepted truths, post-truths. Poetry like T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland or William Butler Yeats's The Second Coming resonates with the uncertainty and fragmentation characteristic of post-truth. When Yeats says things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, it vividly echoes today's disillusionment, making poetry an art form for grappling with unreliable reality as well. Moving outside English, probably, Rainer Maria Rilke in Letters to a Young Poet, 1929. Rilke is So amazing. I love Rilke like I love kids. So Rilke encouraged writers and readers to leave the questions now. And he continues, perhaps, once you leave the questions now, you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. So beautifully he says it. You will, in at some point, at some distant future, you will live along some distant day into the answer. So smooth, into the answer, falling into the answer, like falling in love. Poetry reminds us that life isn't about having all the answers, but also about having questions, exploring questions. Thomas Heaney famously, um, in his Nobel lecture 1995, Seamus Heaney said, the poet is on the side of undeceiving the world. Undeceiving the world. I would say this not just about poets, but also about readers as well. Heaney seems to suggest that poetry has a unique power to reveal truths, clear illusions, and confront the often concealed or distorted realities of human experience. For Heaney, poets are engaged in a process of undeceiving. They, you know, poets, they peel away societal facades, you know, the mask, challenge oppressive narratives, and bring clarity where oh, William Wordsworth defined poetry, preface to lyrical ballads. Okay, that was a question, I guess. Okay, so that is what the poet and by extension the reader can do, removing the societal pretensions, challenging established narratives, and providing clarity where there is confusion or denial, as in what is happening in Iran and Israel. This role of the poet aligns with a commitment to honesty, courage, and authenticity in their work. And as far as readers are concerned, it is also about a commitment, a dedication to a life of honesty, courage, and authenticity to art. Seamus Heaney's words convey that rather than simply embellishing reality or indulging in escapism, poetry can serve as a tool of insight and moral clarity. I am not sure. I'm quoting him, but I am not sure. He said this in 1995, so I believe that Heaney has seen enough to know that yes, it is possible. And Heaney's version of poetry seeks to again unveil the deeper layers of existence, grief, love, beauty, suffering, illuminating truths that can challenge, inspire, or exactly poetry bears testimony, provoke reflection, giving testimony. Beautiful thought. Poetry bears testimony to our experiences. Poetry is a receptacle of the past as well, bearing testimony to whatever happened. And this process of undeceiving that our friend just reminded us might not always lead to comfort or resolution of problems, but it does foster a richer, more grounded understanding of ourselves and the world, encouraging readers to question assumptions and see beyond appearances. Poetry is not an exclusive club for experts. Our principal and our IQSC coordinator, sir, both of them were hoping that this lecture would open some doors for our students. My dear students, I or any of the seniors here or whoever is here, we cannot open doors because you are already in. It is not an exclusive club. It is not somewhere you have to take a paid registration. It is not for experts. It is something everyone can enjoy. And I can tell you with my own experiences and conviction that when I wanted my students to interpret poetry freely, to look at suggestion in poetry, Vyanjana in poetry, it was always the backbencher who came up with the best answers, not the front bencher. The front bencher had all theoretical solutions to poetry, but when it came to interpreting a piece of poetry, it was the backbenchers. Poetry is not exclusive property of anyone, not for the best students, not for the worst students, not for the middle benchers, nobody. It's for everyone. It's for everyone. Start small. If you are not yet into poetry, maybe read a poem a day, or maybe read 100 poems a day. That will be a good beginning. Follow some poetry accounts online, not mine. I don't write often. Or just notice where poetry shows up in unexpected places. I love seeing those little bits of poetry in public toilets. I know many of you will have a lot of memories to share about poetry in, railway coaches toilets. Bits of poetry. Or you go to some tour and you find it. Shumita ma'am agrees. She has seen it. Every one of us has seen it. Song lyrics it could be. Movie scripts it could be. Even memes it could be. The most unexpected places and graffiti. Exactly. Shatrupa ma'am is into graphic literature. Poetry is not just an art to be dissected, but one to be felt and lived, making the act of reading poetry as vital and enriching as poetry itself. Please carry these poems with you, not just the books. I say carry poems with you in your hearts. Allow poetry to guide your imagination. You will not be led astray. Allow poetry to sharpen your empathy and enrich your journey. Your journey may take you anywhere, it doesn't matter. But if you have good company, and I assure you, poetry is very good company. If you have good company, it doesn't matter where you are going. Many of us would agree. I love to visit a place where I have my best friend with me. It's not the place, isn't it so? I shouldn't burden you more. It's 4 o'clock. In T.S. Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, we hear the phrase repeated, do I dare? Do I dare? This is exactly where I would want to leave you, or I would want to conclude this lecture. Do you dare? Do you dare to steal poetry? If not, just think what happens to a dream deferred. From Langston Hughes's Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? A question that still rings painfully relevant today. Just think of it and you will not sleep. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it explode? Isleen, over to you. Does it explode? What do you think? My lecture is over. That's it. Isleen is going to take over, and thank you for that explosive ending. Instead of claps, I have an explosion. So yeah, thank you for your kind listening, and of course, I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on it. I saw a lot of messages, but because I didn't want to break it somewhere, I continued. I'm sorry for that. And now I'm done. It's over to you.
Thank you so much, Manu sir. It was a very interesting lecture indeed. And yes, there are many questions in the chat box, and I would request participants to mute themselves. You can raise your hand or you can just mention in the chat box, and when I call out your name, you can directly interact with the speaker. But Manu sir, let me begin with a question from one of my students, because this lecture was meant for the students, and I'm very happy that he has honestly put this question in the chat box. So it is a question from Prem Nayak, and he asks, Sir, when I read poetry like To the Skylark, a fear comes to my mind. But when I listen to a Bollywood song, it gives me pleasures. So, how do I deal with this difference?
Well, I think that is not a simple question. I think that is a deep question. Whether he intended it or not, I can sense that depth and profundity in that question. And on the one hand, the cultural theorist in me would say that it is a difference between high culture and low culture, where I would say that, when you read To a Skylark, you are talking about high culture, and when you're reading a Bollywood movie, it is low culture. High and low doesn't mean any hierarchy. It simply means that high would mean, the theorists would say refined, elevated works of art that are considered, quality stuff. Where this low culture would mean, things of the populace, things of the common masses. High culture is about class. Low culture is about mass. High culture doesn't have mass appeal. Low culture doesn't have any class. This is the general assumption. Now, I would also, I cannot answer your question, my dear friend, because that's a very tough question. And I appreciate that question because I can see that you are probably on the right track. Definitely. Because to ask that question, you need some experience with things. And you are doing poetry when you ask such a question. But one important thing, one more thing that I want to tell you is the way the sublime and the beautiful has been explained by theoreticians and critics. The sublime, whether you talk about On the Sublime by Longinus, or the way the sublime has been explained by people like Edmund Burke, the sublime is something that is believed to evoke fear, trembling in you, a respectful trembling in you. That is how, both beautiful and sublime are beautiful itself, for beginners. Both refer to beauty, but sublime refer to an elevated idea of beauty, which sometimes give rise to fear, give rise to terror. And with when Shatrupa ma'am quoted that question, this was the first thought that came to my mind, that you are talking about the sublime and the beautiful, or the sublime versus the beautiful. What you see on the movie screen is probably a version of the beautiful that we can process, we can understand. But what you encounter in a poem like To a Skylark is beyond understanding. It is an epiphanic experience that can only be explained in terms of the sublime, on the sublime. So, if you feel that fear, let me tell you, you have experienced this fear elsewhere as well. Elsewhere as well. You feel this trembling. Sometimes you call it butterfly in the stomach or whatever it is, but you feel that trembling, you feel that fear elsewhere as well. Maybe when you are lost in music, maybe when you are trying to recollect something that is very close to your heart, you feel that trembling. It is not fear. You know you are not having a panic attack, but still it is a fear. And hats off to you for asking such a profound question. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for such a sweet response. Now we will move on to the next question where Sashi Prabha Eka asks, Sir, how does poetry lack tangible impact?
How?
How does poetry lack tangible impact?
Tangible impact. See, the thing is, when you talk about poetry itself, we say that it is not concrete, it is something abstract. Maybe that is theory, but think about it. We say poetry can move masses. We say poetry, when we talk about Orpheus, or the concept of Vatis, from which the idea of poet has emerged. We say that poetry does amazing things. Poetry can move stones, all those stories. But when it comes to real life, it doesn't work that way. It is, say for example, I cannot say that I will solve all the problems between Israel and Palestine by reciting a sonnet. No. For that, you need some sort of mediations, so many things. And that is why people said poetry makes nothing happen, because you feel a sort of helplessness. With poetry, you know this is awesome, but you still feel helpless. On the one hand, you need others also to understand the language you are speaking. Yes, you are speaking the most beautiful language in the world, for example. But then, if the other person doesn't understand that most beautiful language in the world, then there is no communication. Same with the problems in our life. The problems in our life don't have the ears or the brains to understand poetry. And that is why poetry cannot solve practical problems. That is why poetry has failed. When you talk about these debates or diplomatic things or problems between people, only in movies people hear songs and then their heart changes. In real life, it doesn't always happen. Maybe very rarely it happens, but that requires a person with extreme receptivity and sensitivity to poetry. Otherwise, it is not going to happen. It is not the problem of poetry, it is the problem of our lack of receptivity. It is our problem. You go near the sun, you will be fried. Now, it is not the sun's problem. Sun didn't do anything bad to you. Icarus put on those waxen wings and he flew close to the sun, and you know what happened. It is not the sun's fault. It is not the sun's fault. Sun is like that. It is our vulnerability. It is our incapacity to face that heat. Same with religious experiences. You say when you come closer to God, you have lots more, you have to face a lot more suffering. Why? Maybe all that is waxen in you have to melt, and all those waxen wings with which you aspire to aim for Godhead should fry down. Only then you can reach that Godhead. Think about what Tagore said in this. Like Tagore said this, I cannot with my music. You are using me as a flute. God is using me as a flute. All these things Tagore says, and then he mourns in utter dismay, utter despair. But I am not able to reach you. But God, I am not able to reach you. Why? This is, and he says, because I am an unsuitable vessel. You fill and fill and fill me, dear God, with your love and grace and providence. Still, there is more to fill in me, God says. Why? Because I am a frail vessel, not because God's blessings aren't enough, but because my frailty is so much that even all those blessings are insufficient. Same with poetry. Poetry is not insufficient, but we are insufficient. Our lives are insufficient. Our problems are insufficient. Not insufficient, incapable, uncapable, whatever it is. Kanisma will correct me if I'm wrong. So that is the problem. That is why I said, what did I say? Now I forgot what I said. She caught at me, I guess. That was why. What was she asking? She or he?
That why doesn't poetry have a tangible impact?
Yeah, that I think that is why this tangible impact is missing. Now, theoretically, you can talk about many other reasons why poetry cannot have a tangible impact. I don't want to go theoretical because I have approached this lecture itself entirely from a poetic perspective, not from any theoretical perspective. And I don't think you wanted a theoretical answer either. So this is my take on it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Actually, Kanis ma'am has written a comment that when we talk about the idea of tangibility or poetry being tangible, she says that energy sharing happens when we read a poetry or when we share poetry. So she has put in that comment.
Right. You know,
Energy
when
share.
when Kanisma says something, I obey. She's mother. Um, she's the mother of all poets. You know, thank you, Kanisma. It was nice having you. And when you are in the audience, it gives such strength and such inspiration because there is. I have never seen a better person in any audience than you. The finest person in the audience. Thank you, Ma. Yes, yes.
Yes, sir. There is another question from Shabina ma'am. And she asks if poetry is able to humanize us to the extent that we recognize the essential humanity that binds us all, irrespective of race, gender, class, caste, nationality, religion, then all conflict can be negotiable, and hoping that it does.
It does. If everyone has the same, if we are talking the same language, if we are talking the language of poetry, then everybody will understand and everybody will accept. That's the only problem. You know, it's okay, even in that language of negotiation called poetry, even in that language, as Shashi Tharoor would say in his in India of the multi, I forgot that title of that essay, where he says that we must agree about one thing only. We must agree on how to disagree, and I think that's all. If we agree on poetry, if we agreed that as a common ground, then we are all set for solving all our problems. We can disagree, of course, we can have multiple perspectives, of course, but then we should be on that common ground. But having that common ground is not always easy also, because you know, when you talk about common ground, you cannot always speak about equality, because when somebody is talking from here and somebody is listening from here, how can you talk of a common ground? And when many are haves, or when some are haves and many are have nots, how can we talk of a common ground? So where is that egalitarian society that poetry or literary theory have all wished for? It is, after all, a wish. And that common platform of negotiation and compromise and friendly understanding is always in that bucket list called wish list. And we are never able to move that into our cart. It is always in that wish list. It can never be purchased, because they will say, like in Amazon, it is they will say not available in your location. Which location? Not available on Earth. This solution is not available on Earth. Where there are better people, where there are better ways of understanding, maybe there are many. There, it can be moved to the cart. But in Earth or on Earth, if you are there in the world of humans, then not much chance. currently unavailable. We don't know when this product will become available in your location. Terms and conditions apply. Shabina ma'am, thanks for the question. And thank you also for turning the video on and coming online. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, sir. And then we had another question, something about poetry and graffiti. Just let me find it out.
If
It's
there is a
very.
question on poetry and graffiti, immediately that
I
question will be
request. Yes, I got it.
transferred to Shatrupa ma'am. The question will
No,
be
sir.
transferred to Shatrupa ma'am because she is an expert in all those things. Yeah, please.
Yeah, let me just read out the question. What is the significance of conflicting meanings of graffiti poems? At times, written words or phrases in graffiti poems in surroundings become difficult to comprehend. If graffiti poems target the commoners, what is the importance of complexity in the language? That is the question.
I don't
Graffiti
think
is
I have
common art.
understood the question. I don't think I have understood, and I don't think even if I understand, I will be able to answer that question. So
Actually, what the participant
pass to Shatrupa ma'am.
What the participant means to say that if we decipher poetry in graffiti, and if we say that yes, poetry uses language intelligently, or sometimes the language of poetry is complex, which is why that fear comes in. So how do we put poetry and graffiti together when graffiti is a subculture, an art meant for the common people? Whereas poetry is, a bit difficult. It cannot be accessed by commoners, which is why there is that element of fear. So how do we have these, or how do we negotiate these conflicting ideas when we think of poetry side by side graffiti, which is meant to be an art for the commoners? That is the question.
I think poetry is for the commoners. If all of you say that you are uncommon, then I will say that yeah, poetry is for the uncommon. I am common, very uncommon, maybe even below common, and I love poetry. And yeah, I agree that poetry is not easily accessible if you are not trained. But then, what is easily accessible if you don't have training? If you don't have training, you cannot drive. But how many of us don't have a driving license? So if we want, we can get trained. And you know, my dear friends, the unfortunate or the fortunate thing is there is some wealth, some treasure out there. Those who know that access it and they keep quiet. And those who do not know that there is that treasure. And they think it's an empty pot. So they don't look in that direction. When I see people who say bad things about poetry, who don't understand poetry, I feel so privileged because I have access to a heaven which they don't even know. And if somebody chooses to stay in hell, let them happily be there. I will be happy in my heaven called poetry. And I think if we just want to say that we are common and I cannot understand poetry, fine. Be a commoner, don't understand. Be happy in your commonness. Be the Aam Aadmi, and you will look like that picture on your Aadhaar card always. You will never change that picture. If you want to change that picture, you have to do something about it. So, आम आदमी है, लेकिन कुछ और करना है तो you have to study poetry. You have to be the uncommon, and then yeah, why not? We can say we are uncommon because If you look at the masses, or if you look at percentages, people who read poetry and write poetry and even think about poetry are far too few. So, but I am happy, and I'm selfishly happy to be in that minority always. I never repent that, and whenever I feel sad about something, whenever I feel that, oh, I don't have that, or I don't have this, I will console myself. I do that, saying that I have my poetry. What else do I need? What else do I need? They may have everything else in the world, but if they don't have poetry, I am ahead of them. And I see this question on Otto Nightingale, Satyabandha Poi. Sir, is there any usefulness of poetry like Otto Nightingale in today's world? I don't know, but if you feel that you benefited from this lecture, you can be sure that there is some usefulness, because if I am sitting here, it is only because of that one poem and my professor, Dr. AJ, who taught me that poem. Until that day, I didn't know that there was such a beautiful world out there called poetry. And that day, when I learned Otto Nightingale, that was when, and I think many of us here would say that that is why we are here. Now, is there any usefulness? Now, that is a very practical question. You are talking about the other side, dulce et utile. Poetry has two purposes, according to people like Sir Philip Sidney or Shelley, or the person who first talked about it, Horace, the Roman poet. What is the purpose of poetry? Twin purposes: to delight and to instruct. Dulce et utile. And you are talking about the usefulness of poetry. Even if poetry is not useful at all, the delightfulness of poetry is more than enough. It gives you so much. And my dear friends, why are we doing so many things? Just for pleasure, right? Just for gaining some delight. We live for delight. Yeah, our life is strewn with so much of tragedy and problems and everything, but those little moments of pleasure or delight is why we are still interested in life. Lust for life comes from those small moments of happiness. So if delight isn't your aim, don't worry about Otto Nightingale. If you are only, I'm not speaking about you, my dear friend, I'm talking in general. So usefulness can be understood in so many different ways. So if can I resolve a conflict by reciting Otto Nightingale? Maybe I cannot. I wouldn't be able to, but I can resolve so many conflicts within me if I just tell myself, oh, for a draft of vintage that has been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and provencal song and sunburnt nuts, or for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouths, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. I haven't drunk in life, but I am more drunk, I'm more tipsy than anyone else, anyone who has drunk the whole bar. Why? Because I have these verses with me. Because I have stolen these verses and imbibed these verses within me. When people invite me to have a drink, I tell them I cannot. Because even through my veins, it is liquor or wine running. Wine is bottled poetry, they say. And I have, gulped it fully. So I don't need any external stimuli. I don't need any external intoxication. And Otto Nightingale does that to me. And, you know, if my heart is a waste basket, is a recycle bin, then you can say that poetry, Otto Nightingale, is unnecessary, because my heart is suffused with a lot of Otto Nightingale. not just that poem, but many readings and many interpretations and many moments with Otway Nightingale. So yeah, there is a lot of usefulness for many of us. And I'm sure Satyabanta, you found it far more beautiful and useful. And that is why you asked about that specific question. Probably you got hurt somewhere when you realized that you couldn't do nothing with that poem in today's world. But that is not because your poem is bad, that is because our world is bad. The world is too much with us, too much. And if the world is not good enough to accept our Otway Nightingale, let it go to, let it go home, right? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. And whatever you said, it tells us a lot about the idea of living with poetry and how can we live with poetry. And the sentence that you spoke, they may have everything in the world, but I have my poetry. It really touched me. I am emotional listening to this line. And the way you spoke it tells you that the world can take away, steal everything from you, but not poetry. If you read poetry, if you feel poetry, if you appreciate poetry. And I feel that poetry does not intrude on your space. Poetry beckons to you from afar. Poetry is very patient. Poetry wants to see whether you are willing to come to poetry. Poetry never intrudes. Poetry never, does something intentionally to make you afraid, because poetry is very loving. Poetry understands, and that is why those who appreciate the value of poetry, they want to come and live with poetry. And even if they have nothing, they have poetry, it makes them feel empowered. So thank you so much for that answer. And now I would like to invite Ishleen, because that was an interesting idea when you posed the question at the end of your lecture, what happens to a dream deferred? And she said, does it explode? So if she wants to say anything at this point, I would request her to go ahead. And it's very nice to see you, Kaniz ma'am and Shabina ma'am. I'm really happy to see you here participating and contributing. Thank you so much for the encouragement. Yes, Ishleen, if you would like to say something, please go ahead. Okay, maybe she isn't there. If she will come back or respond, then we can always allow her. Meanwhile, we can take another question. Dear sir, what do you think of translated poetry? Okay, does translation justify source poetry?
Yeah, that is a problem. Jasmine K. Okay. Translation and poetry, it's not just about poetry. I think any translation, it's almost impossible to approximate the original. It is next to impossible. And, people who have translated and people who are translators would readily acknowledge this, that they couldn't do full justice to any of those translations when it comes to encapsulating the essence of the work. But then what they try to do, most people would say, instead of looking at the words, I looked at the emotion that is conveyed. And in my translation, I tried to take a little bit more freedom so that I could convey the emotion better through something else, because translation is extremely tough. I mean, my experience of translation, when I have tried translating prose, I got dead. It is impossible to translate prose. But when it comes to translating poetry, and I admit that it is my deficiency that I couldn't understand or make sense of translating prose, because I am not good at it, frankly. But when it came to poetry, I have always felt that I could feel the poet. I could feel the emotion in the poem. And yeah, it is not always possible to approximate or come closer to what the poet meant or what the poem has. Now these are all difficult questions. Is it the reader's response that is there in the poem, or is it what the author has put into the poem, or is there something objective out there in that poem? So yeah, all these questions the translator has to ask, and that is why they say there are agonies and ecstasies to translation. There are feasts and famines to translation. But then so should we do away with translation? No, we need translation, because that is our only way to know something. Or how would we know somebody like a Pablo Neruda? We don't know his language. How would we ever know somebody like a Pablo Neruda, or that poems, all those poems? So we will never know. So it is about accessibility, and translation is one of, or the most important tool that makes literature accessible to a wider audience. And that is why we need to respect and love translation. Yes, it can never fully, capture the essence of any poem. It's impossible. When we read the poem in its original and when we read the translation, we feel so sad. Same with even adaptations, movie adaptations, anything. When you read it, you feel something, and when you see that in a movie, you miss everything. But then, reachability is a problem. Unless you learn a language, how can you read their poetry? And reading a poetry is reading a culture, is learning a culture. So the moment you start reading a culture's poetry, a people's poetry, a country's poetry, you are embracing that country and that people and that language itself. And language is curious. We cannot imagine that all languages works in same ways. No, not at all. There are languages without certain things that we have in our own languages. We already see what is happening with English and our Indian languages. That is why we are having problems with present perfect tense, for example. We don't understand it because our Indian languages don't have an exact parallel to a present perfect or a past perfect tense. We don't talk about things in that way. Now, people cannot understand that. English people would ask, so how would you say this? Same with a language like Chinese, where, or Japanese, where people cannot even imagine in certain ways. I think it was Chinese. Some people came to China, some American, I think it was not Chomsky, some earlier linguist, some famous linguist from America. They came to China, I guess, to learn a lot more about certain aspects of their language, linguistics, basically. And what they found interesting was that they couldn't even think of something called what if. What if? We can understand what if, but when they ask them question, what if Jiang Zemin weren't the president of China? They will immediately say, Jiang Zemin is the president of China. So it doesn't make any sense to them. But it's okay. Jiang Zemin is the president of China. Agreed. But what if he isn't the president? But he is the president of China. But what if? They cannot even think in that manner. So, languages are beautiful. Languages tell us a lot about even people's, we have this what if questions, right? What would you do if you were the president of India or something? Then we said we would give a full year holiday to the students and all those things. But these concepts don't work for certain people at all. Similar with many other languages and their cultural traditions. So translations help us know these things. We don't have certain words. We have certain words in our own languages that English doesn't have. Isn't it so? So we come across all these things when you do translation. So it is not just about reading translation. If you are interested, I would say that even if you don't have skill or even if you don't have interest, just try translation, because the moment you try something, you learn something about it. That is when more aspects of it come to your mind. So, you know, if possible, try everything, try everything, fail, no problem. And you don't have to make it your career also. Fail, yeah, some people make failure their career also, but I'm saying you don't have to make translation your career, but give it a try so that you can know how it feels and what it is like to do translation. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is by Ashlyn Bibina, and she asks, how do you see poetry evolving in the modern world? How does it evolve in the
Poetry is
present?
evolving big time. Poetry, poetry is evolving. Modern is very confusing because we had this modern always. When Shakespeare lived, they were moderns. When Chaucer lived, he was a modern. So yeah, modern times. But I understand that you want to. You are asking about what is the evolution of poetry, or how we look at the evolution of poetry in this 21st century scene. Now, poetry is facing a lot of things from AI, not a doubt. I am not saying it is facing any problem or any advantage. It can be anything. It all depends on how we use AI. But AI is here to stay, just as poetry is here to stay as well, or poetry has stayed as well. And AI is learning new things. AI keeps writing fresh poetry every single day, and with every poem it is writing. And I wish that we were like AI, in the sense, with everything we do, we learn new things, and AI is, with its multiple texts, it is going everywhere and collecting information and processing and producing language, the large language model, right? Amazing. And I think, this is my personal foolish opinion, I think AI has a lot more to do with language and poetry than with any other discipline. And I think AI works most prominently with language only. It is a language model, right? So that's, isn't that something beautiful? AI is just our customer. Before AI came, we were the customers of language. AI is a newcomer to our shop, where we are selling poetry, novels, stories, meanings, interpretations. So AI is a newcomer, and that is changing the mindscape and the landscape of poetry. Then we are grappling with questions on social media and its impact. I find it very good for poetry, because earlier, we know what happened to John Keats, for example. Had difficulty publishing, reviewers, editors cursing him, blaming him, saying they don't have quality, all these things. Now, whatever trash we write, we will get good comments, right? Now, at the end of this lecture, Shatrupa ma'am will never say, "Oh, that was a terrible lecture, a terrible beauty is born. Manu sir, what is this?" She will say, at least, maybe personally she will say, but at the end of the meeting, she will say, "We had an accelerating session by an accelerating person, and it was full of insights," like that. Why? Same. And when you put some poetry on your social media, you will get a lot of claps. And like that baby mosquito, we think that they are clapping because they appreciate us. We don't know they are clapping to dismiss us forever from the world. So, social media is doing great things, and social media is a platform for us to publish, post, present our poetry. And there are social media people who read poetry genuinely on social media. For example, on Instagram, or until recently, I used to like this platform, Miracle. Right now, they have made it a paid one, and I have stopped. Whenever something becomes paid, we stop using it. Right? We are Indians, country. India is our country, of course. So, uh, so social media is bringing about a lot of change to the way poetry is written, poetry is disseminated, and also poetry is published. Now, think about this. A decade earlier, you couldn't think of something like self-publishing. Now, everyone can publish. And we see a lot of trash being published as books. I'm not blaming anyone, but what is happening is people are not getting clear feedback also. Wrong feedback. Nobody reads. And nowadays, I see that even journals are sending feedback by generating those feedback from AI. Nobody is reading anything. And do you think that you give a foolish, useless poem? I don't know whether any poem is useless. I don't think. But if you give a substandard poem to ChatGPT and ask it to write a detailed critical appreciation of this poem, it won't say, "Oh, this is just mediocre stuff," and think I'm not going to do it. No, it will speak about the similes and metaphors and the beautiful images, the tapestry of patterns, those typical word, ChatGPT words. So that is a problem too. And I feel sad that our teachers especially, aren't mostly available. Many of our teachers aren't available or approachable for our students to show their poetry and get an honest feedback, which is very unfortunate. I know we are all busy, but then where else will we get some feedback, right? So that is a big problem. But apart from that, I think, whatever it is, I used words like crap to describe poems, but I think it shouldn't be like that, because a poem that you have written is like a child you have given birth to. And whether he or she is lame or mentally challenged or whatever, you're not going to throw away that child into the bin. You will bring him up, right? So, same with poetry. Do that. Love that poem and let it thrive. And if it fails, fine, we cannot do anything about it. But we should give it a chance. And that first audience is very important. You have to show at least that one poem to someone who can give you a balanced feedback. Because if you don't show, you can never know. I see a lot of extraordinarily talented people who haven't realized that they are poets at all, or that whatever they are writing is poetry at all. Give a little bit of inspiration or encouragement, just encouragement. You say that, okay, this is good, you can improve on this and these things. And I see every person who has been given a positive feedback writing a far better poem next time. Everybody. So yeah, we can say poetry is inborn and all those things, but then I also believe that poetry can be cultivated to a certain extent. Definitely, at least everybody can be a Aam Aadmi poet, at least. Yes.
Thank
Oh,
you.
what
Thank
was
you,
the
sir.
question? Did I answer the question? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
There is another question by Jyoti Cassandra Devi. It is on teaching poetry. She's a teacher and she says, "Sir, sometimes I fail to bring the joy of poetry to my students or fail to make them understand the pleasure of reading it themselves and engaging with poetry." So would you like to respond to this for teachers, something for
Yeah,
teachers?
I fully appreciate that question, and I really, appreciate your honesty in bringing that question. Most teachers would say, I teach extraordinary poetry and my students sit there spellbound listening to my poems. But that is in the real situation. Real situation is very different, especially if you go to a, another batch, a batch where no literature students are there. Yeah, if I have found very good batches, science batches that are very receptive to poetry, but then there are, it is tough. There are classes or batches where you will not find a single person listening to you or receptive to what you have got to talk about poetry. And I myself can tell you with a lot of uh, sadness that I am like that. If I don't get a good listener, I will fail. So if I could speak, at least I am feeling that I could say something today in this lecture, because only because there were some of you who turned your videos on and who were attentive and listening and responding to what I was saying. This is very important for a teacher. I guess that is very important. And to a dead class, it is extremely difficult to teach poetry. Well, you can say so many things, but practically it is really tough to talk poetry to a dead class that doesn't have ears or nothing. But then we cannot blame them always, because they haven't been exposed to poetry, or they aren't interested in poetry, and it is not possible for everyone to understand poetry, and it is none of their fault also. Maybe there are people who try to learn and everything, but they don't find it interesting. What can we do? We also have lot of areas where we cannot understand or appreciate anything, right? How many of us understand mathematics? How many of us understand physics? Do you think those are all bad subjects? No, we are bad at it. We are bad at it. Even I cannot appreciate novels. People say, Manu, novels, this is best literature, best form of literature. But for some reason, I'm not able to appreciate novels, understand novels. So, we are all limited. Same with students, they are limited. But, I remember a class which I taught from 2010 to 2013. I was the junior most teacher there, and a new batch of students, not a single person interested in poetry. And I struggled. I struggled a lot. A secret, my HOD, who was very sweet with me, asked me, Manu, what would you love to teach? I said, sir, poetry. So my HOD, I wouldn't say he or she, ensured that I got everything other than poetry to teach. So I was teaching, and she or he asked me, "What would you like not to teach?" I said, "Fiction." So I got The Great Gatsby and a host of short stories to teach. Um, you know, but the thing is, whether I teach fiction or drama, I cannot live without poetry. So naturally, I taught fiction with a lot of side dishes, poetic side dishes, and sometimes fiction became the side dish. But I remember with a lot of gratitude that those students called me Gatsby. I don't know if that is a compliment or a curse, but they call me Gatsby even today. So, what I am trying to tell you is, for the first 1 year almost, they were completely dead to anything poetic I was talking about, and they were wondering why this person is saying so many unnecessary things. What is the use of this? We are just interested in having questions and answers, and he's not giving summary. He's just talking about poetic, how the Great Gatsby can be interpreted poetically, and comparing Great Gatsby with poems. So I was very young and immature, of course. Not that I'm mature and immature now. So but what happened was, and I don't say that it is all because of me or anything. Others also, they were good teachers, and though most of our teachers feel threatened having a good teacher in the department, the truth is otherwise. If you have another good teacher in the department, that makes your job a lot easier. But whenever we see another good teacher in the department who the students love, we feel threatened. And that is where I feel teaching is the worst profession. I see a lot of memes and messages on Teachers Day and stuff saying guru magic, dam doom, all these things, but teachers feel threatened when they see quality elsewhere. I am the only teacher. I should be the only teacher the students love. So these problems have, I mean, I'm straying away from the topic. Yeah, that is my forte, straying. So what I was trying to say was, third year, by the time these students completed their BA course, except 3 or 4 students, I think there were 20 odd students in that batch, except 3 or 4, everyone started writing poetry, either in their mother tongue or in English. But everyone else, others, of course, I'm not blaming them. They also tried. They couldn't. But everyone else started writing poetry. And 3 of them write poetry even today. And 4 of them have published their collections. And so you can, but it requires a lot of patience. I taught even afterwards, but then I didn't continue this experiment. That year I was so foolish. After by 2013-14, I became more sensible and I realized that this is tough, which is a bad thing, which is why I hate maturity. We shouldn't grow up. If I had that same nonsense of 2010 in me, I would have continued the same experiment even today. But now I know that, okay, it will take 2-3 years, so I'm not going to do it. Done, finished. I'm a bad teacher now, very bad teacher of poetry, because I no longer have that patience with students. So this is a reality. This is not something, I don't know who asked this question, but it is not something you alone face. It is a universal problem wherever poetry is taught. Even in literature classes, we find these dead audiences, and we find ourselves cursing ourselves. And after a certain period or after a certain level, we feel discouraged and disillusioned, and we cannot bring that energy or passion into the class. It is not our fault. I don't blame ourselves. I don't want to, because everybody is human, right? And there is a limit. There is a human limit. But if anybody wants to experiment, I think it is possible to cultivate poetry. I think it is possible to wake up those sleeping embers that lie dormant within the hearts of our students. It is possible, extremely difficult.
True, true. That's really the fact. Sir, it's almost 2 hours. So, are you okay with another question? Maybe we can make it the last. Okay.
What do you want to stress, that it will be the last, or
No, I'm asking whether you are okay with the questions coming up.
when it is poetry, discussing poetry, all night I will sit and talk. Any number of questions.
That's great. Because we have some students here or people who are trying their hand at poetry. They have certain questions related to form. Someone asks, when I write poetry, I cannot follow a particular meter. I might know about meter and everything, but I cannot bring that into poetry, and it maybe hampers my flow. And someone else asks, then could you specify certain techniques which is usually used by poets and which we can also use while writing? Is form so important while trying to write poetry? If I can summarize all these concerns into one question.
Lovely questions, lovely questions. Very genuine concerns when somebody is starting to write poetry. It's tough, no question. How to bring this rhyme and meter, everything into your poetry. It is tough. And let me tell you, there is nothing wrong with free verse poetry. There is nothing wrong with poetry that doesn't have rhyme or meter. Nothing at all. Great poetry has been written without rhyme and meter and rhythm and everything. Great poetry has been written with all these things as well. So nothing is a must. But what we have to remember, or some practical suggestions, not for the second part of the question I'm answering, the first part of the question itself. The thing that we can keep in mind is there is something called law and liberty, or form and content. And it is all about balancing these two things mostly. We have to balance. If it is all freedom, we say that the poet should have a lot of freedom. We say that there is something called poetic liberty, so for example, poets can forget tenses. They can, singular, first person singular, they can use an S if they want to rhyme it, poetic license. But what will happen if a poet uses all poetic license and there is only license? It looks like a license shop. Then what will happen? That shouldn't happen. That is the other extreme. But then, just because there is this problem of an S not coming, it should not hamper your poem also. So it is about balancing. It is about, we need a certain element of form. We need a certain element of content as well. There are multiple ways of looking at it. Sometimes, basically, if either form or content hampers your writing, forget it. It should, first thing is writing. So if it doesn't help you, the best example is what happened to drama during the medieval period. They insisted, people like Robert Ello and Castelvetro, those critics argued that Aristotle spoke about the three unities, and Aristotle prescribed these three unities as compulsory: unity of place, action, and time. And what happened was, very few plays were written during this period. What happened? People couldn't write poetry, write dramas, because it is extremely difficult. Even Shakespeare has written just one play, and that too almost, the Tempest, which observes all three unities of time, place, and action. Actually, Aristotle prescribed unity of action alone. He just suggested, or he just described what he saw in the plays of people like Sophocles, that they observed unities of time and place also, but it was not mandatory. But these people, these early Renaissance, people who were just before Renaissance, these critics made it mandatory, and because of that, what happened? No good drama was written during this period. What a tragedy. And it required, two geniuses. First, it required the genius of Shakespeare to flout all these conventions and say that great drama can be written even without any of these unities. Yeah, of course, unity of action is necessary. And then also, people were not sure. Shakespeare was an artist and a businessman. So he had his business concern and he was an artist. It required the intellectual genius of a fat, big-headed person like Dr. Johnson to prove once and for all that the unities are not must. And once Dr. Johnson said this, nobody had any question, because he was very rude. Remember that. You read Life of Dr. Johnson by Boswell, and you will see how rude a person and how amazing a person this Dr. Johnson was. So this is a clear indication that we shouldn't allow laws to, or rules to, really push us to a corner. That shouldn't happen. Expression should be there. But then, if it is all expression without some level of suppression, there will not be any impression. So expression should, in every expression, there should be a certain level of suppression. And suppression is, suppression happens when you adhere to certain laws and rules, and you don't give full free play to your imagination and creativity and your you know your desire for expression. Now, I will tell you something very practical that happens with me when I write poetry. What I have observed is rhyme and rhyme and meter. I also experimented with rhyme and meter when I was a school student, and I wrote poetry like Brett Lee bowled a bouncer and Sachin hit a sixer, and sixer and bouncer are rhyming, and it was all good for me. But very useless poetry, not useless, but very inferior poetry. So, but then that is how you start. And nowadays people start writing poetry with such amazing skill. I have seen the first poems of many of my students, and they are hundreds of times better than what I could write even after 10 years of writing poetry. So these people are full of skill. There is lot of skill, no doubt about it. So don't worry too much about rules, but then what is the use of this form? What are these rules meant for? I think rules help defamiliarize things. Rules help in the last part of Wordsworth's definition. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. That is about freedom, liberty, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Then he adds a condition, recollected in tranquility. That recollected in tranquility is the form, is the rule. Those rules make it something else. Now, what happens is, this is a trade secret. Don't tell anyone else. Of course, you can say I'm just joking, but the point is, when I write poetry, I may not think of a theme, or I start with some theme in mind, and I only when I feel an inspiration to write, I start writing. Now I write the first line. Now I insist on me that I should write poetry with some meter and definite rhyme. This is what I do with my poetry. So why I do that is, when I write free verse poetry, I have written free verse poetry, but only very few such poems have really impressed me. Forget what others say. Others haven't been impressed with most things, but I have been impressed with some of those. Now, when it comes to poems with rhyme and meter, I'm impressed with them more than I'm impressed with my free verse poetry, not because they are better in terms of quality or anything, but because they are new to me. And I will explain this. This is very useful for students, I guess. The point is, when you have to rhyme something, you are looking for words naturally, and yes, it looks there is a certain sense of artificiality and non-spontaneity and everything about it, formality about it. Yes, I agree. But it can, once you get experienced or once you are truly inspired, the rhymes also will come naturally to you, but not always. It doesn't happen every time. So you are artificially or purposefully, consciously looking for a rhyme. And what I have seen is, when I look for a word that rhymes with, usually in English we have end rhymes. The first line ends with rest. So I'm looking at other words. So basic thing to do, A, B, C, D, you go. A, B, best. C, cest. D, dest. No, there is no dest. F, fest. G, guest. I'm thinking, just very commonplace way of thinking. And only when I'm not able to find anything, I will use the computer and look at other rhyming words that I may have missed. But this basic thing, we look for rhymes. And what happens is, I will get a word that is interesting, but that doesn't actually suit my purpose or what I want to say. Now, what happens is, now the poem takes over. Now I am finished, because my best of my knowledge, I had some idea, but that idea I cannot convey in rhyme. I'm finished. The author is dead. Now the poem takes over. Why? Because there is a word. I got a word. Now I have to think of something that rhymes. Of course, I got the rhyming word, but that word cannot blend with my idea. So I have to change my idea. That is where I feel the poem takes over and controls me. When and I'm not, I don't know whether I sound so stupid when I'm saying this, but I believe in this. I believe that language and poetry take over when you are looking for rhyme and meter, and they start guiding you. But when you are trusting your imagination and your brain and your knowledge of language, what you are doing is you are writing your poetry. But that is not the poem that is out there, like 6 characters in search of an author. Many poems are looking for each one of us. Many poems are coming and asking us, see, we don't have a form. Give us a concrete form. And we say, no, I am not a poet. How do we know when we haven't tried even a single line? That is another problem. But then this is what happens, and then the poem takes over. So the theme changes. The first line I had written in a particular way, and I had one particular theme. But then the moment this process happens, my whole thought process is controlled by the poem, and then I can feel that, what can I say, that transformation, that metamorphosis of me, the person, me, the human being, getting transformed into a poet with wholly different ideas that I never had in my mind. I never thought of concepts that I could never imagine. And I have experienced this, it might be, people might misunderstand me, but I have written poems in my mother tongue without knowing the meanings of many of those words. And how can this happen? Without, I have written poems from my dreams. Many of you will have such experience where you cannot recollect. And so, when I was young, I got a recorder as a gift, and tape recorder, and I used to keep it beside me for what? So that I could record. Some poem would take some abstract shape in my head, and then I would just talk to this recorder, and this recorder would uh, remember it. But you don't get the time to write it down, you will forget it quickly. But then many times what happens is you think it is the best poem in the world, and then when you wake up in the morning and read it, you will realize that, oh my god, this rubbish I have written, what is this? But sometimes some amazing fragments have come from these dreams as well. And these things, you have to give that freedom to what? Not to yourself, but to the language. The magic is, I believe, the magic lies in language. The magic of literature lies in language. It is the possibility, it is about the possibilities of language, because language is a huge magician. Language has created everything. If you go for people like Hans Georg Gadamer or Paul Richter or um, you know who's that other person, Truth and Time being Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. So these people tell you that you exist in language. If there is no language, you don't exist, I don't exist, nothing exists. Now it might sound very foolish, but you read more and you will realize that we have all been constituted of language. And if that is the case, then this language is the most creative of all things in the world. And just imagine, when we are creating something wholly new called ChatGPT or AI, where did we go back to? That forgotten language. Everybody said language learning is important, non-important. But why are all these scientists and computer experts now talking about language when they are making this AI generative model, right? What is it? It's about language. They agree that. So I believe the biggest magician is language. And that is one blessing we have. So it is not I or you who write poetry. It is language that writes poetry. And we are just mediums. We are just instruments through which language is writing its poetry. And think about it, and I believe this. It might be completely foolish to everyone else, but I believe it. And I think it is always important that we have our own theories of poetry as well, our own ways of understanding our own poetry as well. And this is where rhyme and meter can really come into the picture to help language take over. That is where I believe in things like what T.S. Eliot speaks about as effacing of the poet. It is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. Because my emotion isn't going to create a great poet. But if it is the emotion of of my language, then I will create amazing poems. And that is why people like Kalidasa began their poems thanking God. Thanking God. And who is God? God who is the giver of language. Shabdarthavivo kavyam. Shabda, it is God who helps me bring together Shabda and Artha. The coalescence of sound and sense happens when, and that is when meaning is created, right? So this is what people pray for. This is, otherwise, why should a great poet like Kalidasa, even in his very last play, thank God? You can say that he is very religious and everything, but he is thanking God when you look at it in one way. But when you look at it closely, you realize that he is thanking God, but his God is actually language. He sees language in that God, and he sees God in his language. And that is where we have the word Sahitya. Shabdartha Sahitau Kavyam. Shabda Artha Sahita Kavyam. Literature, poetry is the blending of Shabda and Artha. Sahitya, Sahitatva, the friendship, the companionship of word with sense. You have numerous ways of looking at these possibilities of word and sense. And this is the last question, and the last question is taking longer. Sorry, thank you. So, my dear students, thank you so much for those wonderful questions. Loved your questions above all. You have amazing questions, and I'm extremely sad that we have to stop it only because Shatruba ma'am told us that this is the last question. I will not take any blame. I have put all the blame on the organizer.
Should I sing?
Oh my God. So now the blame is on me.
Yeah.
But actually, time is the limit. Though this session is so interesting that we can go on and on. Not just interesting, it's appealing. It is engaging, and we are feeling something, and we don't want to let go of that feeling. But then there are technical things like I am thinking about the efforts that we have to make in uploading this long session on YouTube. So will I be allowed to do that or not? So there are, such thoughts in my mind right now. Other than that, I would love to go on and on. I mean, I would love for this session to go on and on. And you see, there is an interesting statement by Soumita ma'am, and she says that poetry is everywhere. Even the lub dub of heart has a rhythm, and hence it is poetic. So it's a very beautiful statement. And you were talking about the art of writing poetry, and how one could just go on with the flow without giving much importance to form if it hampers their art. So Shankari Shankaram ma'am, she said, I started writing poems because of Manu. So you have inspired her to write poetry. And there is a concern there put forth by Dr. Nisha. And she says that creativity in students is reduced because of AI. And all of us will agree with that statement. And if you would like
Creativity
to
in
talk about
everyone
it
is
a little
reduced.
bit, please, sir. If you'd like to talk
Creativity in
about it.
everyone is reduced, and I think more than students, it is the creativity and everything of teachers that is getting reduced because of AI. And I am the first victim, best victim I know, because even when I'm writing a reply to an email, I'm asking ChatGPT, please, this is the email. Can you please draft a reply? Because we are becoming so lazy, and I seriously fear the day, and that day is very close by, when I will be able to do nothing. I will be able to produce nothing, because yeah, it is good, but then there is a lot missing. For example, I can, if I say that I'm going to talk about this particular lecture, what is it, whatever topic, I, share some points or prepare the lecture or give some, whatever, it will give you. And I can give the lecture, I can read it out or whatever, and then I can say that, and then everybody will be happy if I'm delivering it properly and all. Yeah, it will be good. But then, will I be honest to myself? I don't say it is dishonest to take something from ChatGPT, because that's also technology. But then there is something that is lacking, and I think the language that comes out of machine is slightly mechanical. There is something not there. I don't know whether I will ever be able to make a lecture like the one I gave today through ChatGPT. I know that it can give far better lectures, but it won't be able to say the same things that I said, because it will say that this is rubbish. This is not something you have to talk to an elite audience. I was talking about, say, for example, stealing. If I say that, okay, this is the lecture I want to, ChatGPT is never going to give stealing as a good example for poetry or studying poetry. So, but then I believe that what came to my mind at that moment, and that improvisation is not possible with ChatGPT. You can never improvise, in the sense, I can prepare everything with ChatGPT, but when I sit before you and I see the audience, that is when, we all know, we are teachers, so we know whatever we prepare, we talk about lesson plan and everything, but do we ever, or have we ever adhered to that? Never, never have we, never. Because the class, maybe we will start with whatever we plan, the class will take its own course, the river will run its own course, and we cannot control it. We cannot control it. Same with a lecture. So I believe this is very damaging for all of us, especially our brains. We are going to get extremely forgetful. Our brains are going to get completely corroded and corrupted and useless. Yeah.
True, true. And there is another statement by Biswajit Ganguly, which actually, shed some light on the limitations of the examination system when we are trying to appreciate poetry. And he says most of the time a poem is merely reduced to, or engaging with a poem is merely reduced to a reading comprehension exercise and answering a few set questions. That's all. That's all the exposure the students have with poetry. So what would you say to this?
Absolutely, absolutely. Not just poetry. I think, if you look at an exam like the UGC's NET exam, what are they trying to find out in us? Our memory skills. Huh? That is the only thing that is being tested in a NET exam. So I think they should change the topic to memory test or something, instead of NET English. Memory test based on English. I like that you can call it. Exams are, but then it's very difficult to find an alternative also. The moment you make the examination descriptive, if I'm talking about NET, then there will be accusations of subjectivity. Different teachers will be marking, and marking will become a problem. That is a problem. Yesterday I heard that there was no electricity in a state in India. I think it was Haryana, some state in India, there was not no electricity. There was no internet connection from morning till evening. It is in Assam. It is in Assam. Why? A competitive exam is going on and they didn't want the question papers to be leaked. Now, is that the way we prevent leak of a question paper? Have things reached such a state where you have to block the internet in a complete state? Where are we going? So, and then when you say the same thing, what was it we were talking about? Not AI.
The
Question
examination
papers, yeah.
system.
Yeah, examination system. Same. You find questions like, what does Wordsworth mean here? 2 lines. What does Wordsworth mean here? Now, students are wondering. They are taught about intentional fallacy. They are taught that the intention of the author is neither available nor desirable, and if you use it, it is a fallacy called intentional fallacy, and it is all about the interpretation of the reader. But you are definitely asked the author's intention, what the author intended. One. Then there is this problem of what to ask. You are either asked a plot summary, or you are asked something, but there can be creative questions as well. I remember a teacher who taught us Dr. Faustus, and one question that remains fresh in my memory. He taught us a lot Dr. Faustus in class, and for our exam, the question was, analyze Dr. Faustus as Pilgrim's Progress in reverse. I loved that question because he never taught us. And I think, there is a lot of room for improvement in the way we frame our questions. So, and it requires a lot of knowledge also to ask such a question. If you know only Dr. Faustus, you are never going to ask such a question. Evaluate Dr. Faustus as Pilgrim's Progress in reverse. So you should know Pilgrim's Progress also so well. What is the usual question everybody is expecting? The theme of ambition in Dr. Faustus, or all those things. What is Faustus's hamartia, or the typical questions. But questions like this can actually make the students think. And if you have questions like that, then you don't have to shut down internet in a state. No. Yeah, I agree that ChatGPT can still find answers to that questions as well, but that question hasn't been asked. I know that maybe this question was asked in 2008 when I was a BA student. So I think we couldn't find such a thing anywhere. So that was, teachers can do a lot. Teachers can tell students, even teachers who teach in B.Ed colleges, M.Ed colleges, they have a huge role to play. Instead of making students write all those terrible assignments, if they give the teachers some idea as to how to innovate and improvise in teaching, instead of writing all those, lesson plans. What is that lesson plan? Isn't it so outdated? And we are moving forward in everything else except in our education system. Our education system hasn't moved one bit in the last 200 years. Same thing is happening. Everywhere else we are progressing. I saw a video on the internet or something where a person is saying this. So, and then we are hailing our teachers, hailing ourselves. We do it. We pat ourselves on the back. There was a message in WhatsApp yesterday. There was a doctor at Heaven's Gate. What did you do? I treated some patients. Then a teacher comes and he gives a list of all the activities, and midway St. Peter tells him, stop. I cannot take note of more things. You have already suffered hell on earth. Now, please enter heaven. You don't have to worry about your actions because this, as if teachers are doing some extraordinary charity. They are paid, right? Yeah, if they are guest faculty, I agree. What about others? You are paid and you are doing a job. There is nothing heroic or unusual or chivalric about it, right? And it should be like understood like that.
It's true, and sometimes we are not allowed the freedom to teach poetry as we like because always there is something binding us. That is a major concern for teachers. No, we would like to do things differently, but sometimes the classroom does not allow us, and that is a reality. And we have to see how we can negotiate that space, that limited space which is given to us, and our urge to engage with poetry in a different way, to introduce poetry to students in a different way, in a way that we like, in a way that includes our individuality, our thinking. So maybe we have to make that effort, that creative effort, I think. Thank you, sir. There is another question, and it is related to something that I said while introducing you. And she says, during your introduction, it was mentioned you have written works on Sylvia Plath. Can you please share some resources where I can delve more into her works and her life? I am looking for a research topic and she is on my mind. So, something about Sylvia Plath and your relationship with her poetry.
First, a disclaimer, you know, Shatrupa ma'am asked me my CV, my bio note, so that she can introduce me. I said, don't introduce me. No need of, I'm not going to share it with you. You just tell my name, that's enough. And now I understand the folly because the introduction she gave was about me maybe 10 years ago. So most of the things, yeah, it were about me, I guess, but yeah, but those are far removed in time and space. Yeah, about Sylvia Plath, my dear, whoever asked that question, uh, you asked for materials and thinking about topics on it. I don't think I can share materials with you here, or I can immediately tell you any particular source. Maybe I can open ChatGPT here and check, but I don't want to do that. So maybe you can get back to me. I will put my email address or something on the chat box. You can get back to me. I will definitely give that my book, or the PDF of that book. I don't have copies to send you, so I will send. Even otherwise, I don't. I'm very stingy. So I will give you a PDF copy of that book if it helps. But I will give you some good books as well. Use, if you are not familiar with it, use Anna's archive, use Libgen. Libgen is presently active. I don't know when it will be closed again. Anna's archive is working. Use keyword and search. You will find a lot of materials for free. Then click on slow download only, slow download, and then you will have to wait for like 5 or 6 minutes. Then click on download, nothing will happen. Keep waiting for another 10-15 minutes and it will be downloaded. This is how you download something on Anna's archive. Yeah, but I will put my email address and mobile number here. Anybody
Thank you, sir.
Shatrupa ma'am, there was only this thing regarding that question.
Yes, yes, yes. That would really help because even those who could not ask a question, and if they have another question in mind, they can write to you. So,
Sure, you can share it in WhatsApp group or email, whatever communication you have. You can share my
okay,
email
okay.
address or
I'll do that.
my
Yes,
WhatsApp
yes.
so that
I'll
they
do that.
can get back to me.
Yes, that would be helpful. And I find another interesting question, and I must ask it. The person says, being a poet, do you think imagination plays the principal role or reality plays the principal role while you are writing a poem?
If you don't have imagination, it is very tough. But then if you don't have real experiences, then you don't have material for you to imagine on. So I think you are spot on. Both are, neck to neck. You need imagination. I believe in imagination, but not everybody. Because, say, for example, if you look at Indian aestheticians, whether you are talking about Bharatas Natya or Bhamaha, Dandim, Vamana, Utpata, Rudrada, all these theoreticians, nobody talked about imagination in India. I find it baffling. Why? The nearest they came to talking about something similar was when they used the word pradipha. Pradipha is roughly translated, it is talent. But imagine not any talent, but it is not exactly imagination. So imagination is of great renown in the West. But then I think Aristotle doesn't use the word imagination in his poetics. Isn't it? I may be wrong, but I think it is Aristotle. Aristotle doesn't think or speak anything about imagination, I think, in his poetics as well. So you might say that Aristotle was not a poet and he was not interested, but then he had written that treatise Poetics, and if he didn't mention imagination in that Poetics, then either something is wrong with his understanding or that we cannot imagine because he's a giant, right? So if these people haven't talked about imagination, then there is a question mark. Why? It could be understood in another way as well. It could be like they didn't speak about it because it was the obvious. Yeah, say for example, you go to buy a house, and the broker, the person asks you what all things you want in that house that you want. So you say, I need a house and I need this much garden, and there should be a gated community and this and that. And then when you reach there, the thing is, you don't say that there should be oxygen, but without oxygen you cannot live in any house, right? But it is a given. So I also think in that way, because say for example, if you look at Bharata's Rasa Sutra, Vibhava, Anubhava, Vyapichari, Samyoga, Rasa Nishpatti, there he doesn't speak about Sthayi Bhava. Why? Sthayi Bhava is obviously the most important. Why he doesn't speak about? There also, we can only imagine that it is the obvious. That is why he doesn't state it as such. So there is a confusion regarding imagination in that respect. But having said that, in Western literature, Western literary tradition, imagination plays a major role. And you asked me about what it means to a poet, right? I can only tell about myself. For me, I have lost a lot of imagination, and I can relate to what William Wordsworth felt when, I'm nobody to compare myself with Wordsworth or Coleridge, but I'm relating because I can, that point. Wordsworth, in his Ode on Intimations of Immortality from Recollections on Early Childhood, he speaks about loss of poetic creativity. And I think that loss of poetic creativity can be understood in some ways as loss of imagination as well, imaginative faculty as well. And Wordsworth's solution for that is, he says, I have a philosophical mind. And I think that is, there is a connection with that and your question. You were asking me about asking this question, connecting imagination on the one hand and real life realities on the other hand. And don't you see there is a connection between imagination on the loss of creativity on the one hand and the onset of a philosophical mind on the other. I see there is a little bit of connection, and Wordsworth's solution is simple. Yeah, I don't have that much imagination or creativity now, but I will compensate for it with my philosophical mind. How? From recollections of early childhood, intimations of immortality from recollections of early childhood. What is he basically saying? I remember how I used to write poetry. So from that memory, I can still write poetry, though I don't have that imagination or that creative faculty. I think this is my interpretation of that. Uh, and Coleridge also goes through the same phase, but his version is very different. He wrote dejection and all. Now, Coleridge was an out and out pakka poet, a great philosopher and a pakka poet, not like Wordsworth. So Coleridge says, you know, I see them all so excellently fair. I see, not feel how fair they are. So they are still beautiful, but I cannot feel it. I think that is the loss of imagination. And his solution is dejection and all. He's dejected. The other side of the picture is when you look at it from far, both of them have written an amazing poem on loss of poetic creativity. Now, where did they get this imagination and inspiration for this particular poem is an altogether different question. But then, yeah, I think this happens, and that is why T.S. Eliot said in his tradition and individual talent. I don't remember the exact sentence, but it is something like his definition of a poet is anybody who continues to write poetry even after he is 25. In other words, that impressionable age is over. Now, I didn't fully understand that 25, but when I turned 30 and after I crossed 30, I realized what he meant. You lose your imagination and you become a pakka practical person. When you are imaginative, you are a dreamer, then you are thinking about romantic ideals and non-real life like situations. It's all dreamy, and you are a burden most often to the family. Everybody will blame you. The useless person, useless to the society, useless to the family, always sitting like this, smoking or whatever. In their own worlds, but in their own worlds, they are the happiest, but not to the outside world. And then this maturity, onset of maturity, and things like that. And then what happens? We slowly start realizing things. We start realizing that survival is more important. I don't know whether it is realization or false realization. Then we start realizing that we have to be more realistic, forget this dreaminess and things like that. We have to think about earning, and not about yearnings, but about earnings. So this transformation is the transformation when real life situations can come in big time. This is one way of answering your question. Then there is another thing. A rain. How will a poet interpret a rain? If I sit in a rich house on the balcony, I can look at the beauty of the rain and how musical it is when the raindrops fall on the shades and on the eaves. All beautiful. But if I don't have a house, rain is about running for shade. Or if I have a house that is dripping and water flows wherever I am, then it is different. So, will imagination thrive when reality is tough? That is an altogether different question. And we have proof for that in any literature. You see that people who have lot of time are writing literature, not people who have to struggle and fight for their lives. No, I'm not saying they haven't, but it is the general trend. In South India, there is this tradition called the Manipravala. I don't know if you're familiar. The entire Manipravala tradition only the rich and the affluent have written works in that tradition. So, and I think it is a fact, though we can also talk about tragedy feeding imagination. So there are multiple versions to how we look at it, how we connect it, imagination and, so say for example, there is this famous connection between illness and imagination, illness feeding imagination. Now, illness is reality, stark, difficult reality. And this illness is feeding your poetry, feeding your imagination. That Dostoevsky's divine malady, divine illness. He called his fits, hysteria, as divine illness. What is divine? Because Dostoevsky says that for a moment, when hysteria and what they have fits, they will shake in fits. So he says, I will forgo all the benefits I have had in my life for one bout of fits, because that gives me my little bit of heaven, my flight of fantasy. So yeah, that is also a possibility. So there are umpteen different ways of looking at that relationship. Depends on what you want to look at, how you want to analyze it. Thank you. Interesting thoughts. Yes, Satrupam and Kanisma, don't you think that we are having very interesting questions today?
Yes,
Very rarely this happens.
that is why I don't want it to end, because you see, if we talk about just the word spontaneity, this is where we are seeing it, I think. The thoughts that come up, spontaneously to us when we are listening to something, or when we are just being with ourselves, with our thoughts on poetry. We usually don't get the opportunity to express it. Somehow that thought, it is distanced from us, but something that comes in between. So that's why I don't want to come in between, those spontaneous thoughts and you, sir. And as Satakshi Srivastava ma'am says, Shatrupa ma'am has taken the allegation seriously. Yes, I have. I don't want to destroy any discussion that is happening on poetry. So even if I'm not able to upload it on YouTube, I don't know what will happen. But I don't want this to end. That is my sincere thought at this point. But we do have to wind it up. We do have to wind up the session. And I would just like to tell the participants, I would like to thank the 40 participants who are still here with us. I mean, this meeting has gone on for nearly 3 hours, and patiently being in a meeting for this time. Just give me a minute. I'm getting, an urgent call. I'll just get back. Meanwhile, I just want you to think about this particular statement made by Sri Bhale Rao. What about Dhammapada and stillness in connection with poetry? Maybe you could.
Yeah, you can pick the call. Yeah, we will handle until you return. Now teacher is gone. Students, let us make merry. No questions and answers. When Shatrupa ma'am comes back, we will all be serious, and we will do serious discussion. And I didn't have any idea what that Dharmapada question was all about. Yeah, please come on screen. If Shatakshi ma'am, if you are here, please come on screen. Screen. Yeah, and whoever asked that question, see, this is our chance to, daddy, mummy, here nahi katte, so we can make merry. Shatrupa ma'am is gone. Hi, Shatakshi. Hi.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. How are you?
All good, all good. See, this is all toil and trouble. Yes. Yeah, somebody is with you. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. She also likes to listen to you all the time. Every time I listen to your lectures, she is there with me.
No, but she is going to recite something for us today, right?
Yeah. You want to ask something? No.
So that is what Dharmapada is all about.
Please don't pretend, sir. I was listening to you.
No, we had a bit of serious discussion on Dharmapada.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
I
it
heard
was very
everything.
good.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for your observations.
No mention, please. No mention. My pleasure.
Okay. So would you really like to say something on it?
I don't know. Who asked that question and I didn't understand it also.
Maybe it was, while you were speaking, maybe it was a reference to something. Shri Bhalerao asked, what about Dhammapada and stillness in connection with the art of poetry? Stillness, the idea of stillness.
Dharmapada, I think is he referring to Lord Buddha and his Dharmapada? I may be
Yes,
totally
something about.
wrong. I don't know.
Is Shri Bhalerao in the meeting? Actually, it is, talking about Buddhist verse and the idea of stillness, maybe. Maybe his question meant to convey that. Yes, so maybe we can think about it. We might not have things to say about this immediately, but it is a strand of
I
thought
remember
for us today.
a statement made by Matthew Hayden on Sachin Tendulkar's batting. He said Sachin Tendulkar's batting is stillness in a frantic world. I love that quote, stillness in a frantic world. And I think, Lord Buddha, the idea of stillness, when we talk about bodhisattva, when we talk about enlightenment, Lord Buddha is one ideal you see when always in stillness. You feel that silence. You feel, I don't know whether stillness should be connected with silence or is it something altogether different. Stillness can mean a state of no motion. Stillness can also somehow connect with lack of sound, still, and stillness elsewhere can mean death as still. If you find the word still in a poem and you have nothing else to analyze, you will say that the poet contrasts the stillness of death with something, that's how we write, right? So stillness can be, I'm just talking nonsense. If that person who asked the question is here, kindly, sir, please enlighten us
Yes.
with more on this, because you are best place to tell us what this is.
So talking about stillness, we can take another question by Biswajit Ganguly in Wordsworth's expression, bliss of solitude. Does solitude mean a state of loneliness, or does it mean to be in the stillness of one's inner being?
Beautiful question. And I don't need an answer. I don't think anybody needs an answer, because the question itself is poetic. It's poetry. So yeah, let us enjoy that question rather than spoiling it with a senseless answer. So
True, sir. I mean, this question, it can sum up our whole session in a very beautiful way. True. In your session, you talked about how poetry explores questions rather than answers. So it would be fitting for the session to end with a question and not an answer. So we would like to wind up today's session. We are Really grateful to Manu sir. When you talked about me complimenting this session at the end, I'm doing it with all my heart. It is not something which is official. It is not something, which is not spontaneous. It is not something which is packaged, but it is something which is genuine, that sense of gratitude for speaking to us about something that we all love. Definitely, those of us who are here even towards the end of the meeting, definitely we love poetry, and that is why we loved everything that you had to say about poetry today. So I would like to thank our resource person for everything that we felt today while the session was going on and the interactions were happening. And I thank our principal, Dr. Bijay Kumar Maharana sir, because he allowed this event to take place, and he encouraged us to go ahead with the idea. And I'm also thankful to Dr. Brajakishore Sahu, the IQAC coordinator of our college, who gave us the much needed support. And I would like to thank my colleague, my departmental colleague, Dr. Sudebi Giri, who has helped me a lot with the technical aspects of this webinar. And of course, a big thank you to all the participants who have joined us from different places and who have enjoyed this session, who have interacted to make this a lively session. And I would like to say it is because of the participants we are, motivated to think of future events of this sort, where we can get together and just talk about something that we love. It is not a matter of certificates. It is not a matter of, things that we are doing for knack. Though these things we cannot ignore, but many a time these things take us away from what we really love. So if we are here in this session just for listening to things about poetry, for expressing our thoughts on poetry, even for that, I would say this webinar is worth it. So thank you everyone who cooperated and, uh, made these 3 hours worthwhile. Thank you so much. And I would like to wind up here. Thank you so much.
I just want to add one word. Special thanks to Shatrupa ma'am for the way she hosted this. Very friendly, very homely way of hosting the fall session. And I'm sure everyone enjoyed the way you hosted the session. Of course, I didn't thank the college or the principal or the accuracy coordinator. Honest, I express my heartfelt gratitude to all of them for giving me this opportunity where I could actually talk from my heart. I was not forced to do anything. I was given that freedom, and you all people, the organizing team was very good in that particular respect. Especially, they gave me that license. You can speak. Don't worry about anything. So that was wonderful on your part. All the people from the organizing team, especially Shatrupa ma'am, whom we see, but I am sure that a lot of hands must have worked behind the scenes. So thanks to every one of them. And my special thanks to all of you who have come online, and especially to those who have turned their videos on. If I did something or if I could say something, it was 90% of my inspiration came from you who have turned the videos on. So, as always, I'm extremely grateful to all of you. Even those few people who have turned their videos on at the very end, like our Shatakshi ma'am, who was hiding all the while. Mary Dhana, she was here from the beginning. Once in a while, she used to just turn the video on and off. Shabina ma'am was here almost throughout. And your background is amazing. This is real background. No, it's not a bland,
I
scenery. So
always
it's
tell
very
her
nice.
that,
Wow,
her background is
nice.
lovely.
And you look, and you also look lovely
Just
in
wanted
that background.
very good afternoon,
And
good evening to all of you. Manu sir, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. For first few minutes, I had to put it off because I was driving back home. But it's always mesmerizing to listen to you and to Shatarupa ma'am, how she curates everything. I was, actually always taking notes, always trying to stay focused, listen to each and every word that comes from you both. It's been a pleasure. The lights are to add a little bit festive. We just came from Karwa Chauth and we're starting for Diwali. Just a feeling of oneness that we're celebrating from north to south to east to west. We're celebrating. So this was just for all of you. I hope you have all been well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful, wonderful session all along. Didn't even realize that 3 hours have gone by. I was just looking outside and it's already dark and didn't realize it. All credit goes to you, Shatarupa ma'am, to you, Manu sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Shabina ma'am.
and special
Yes.
thanks and love to Kanisma. Lots of love.
Yes, yes. And I love to see her reactions at the right points. And, she's a narrative in herself. I mean, she's poetry, I feel. And her songs are also beautiful.
Also,
But yes,
comments
please, please.
during the session, her comments were all coming, and they were, we were saying, she's saying exactly what we want to say, so we didn't have to put in any efforts on that. Thank you so much, Kanisam, for listening to our hearts and putting them on the screen. Thank you so much.
I'll
Yes.
sing next time. Next time I'll sing.
Yes, Kanis ma'am, we would love to have you the next time we organize something. And you're so energetic, and we want to take some of your energy so that we can go ahead organizing these tasks. Thank you so much for being here. And I would also like to thank Dr. Pradeep Kumar Mishra, who is my colleague from the Department of Physics. And I saw that he was with us from the beginning till about 5:30. So being a man of physics and listening to everything about poetry, it is a great encouragement for me. And he always
Absolutely.
encourages us like this.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would also like to thank my dear students, who gave me the idea that I should organize something like this, something that would make them less afraid of poetry. And I hope that this webinar would do something for that purpose. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It was a very nice session, beautiful session. Happy Diwali to everyone. Yes, may the lights within us never dim along with the Diwali lights. Thank you so much, and wishing everyone a happy Diwali and good night. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.